Greetings, travelers! It's Friday. It's time for 3 o'clock coffee here on Earthshine Education. My name is Mike. 3 o'clock coffee is, of course, us sitting around in the 2 to 3 o'clock hour and drinking coffee or tea or whatever happens to be around. And we talk about astronomy, talk about some different articles about interesting things that have happened during the past week. And this week we start off with, well, what was really big news over the weekend, the solar eclipse, which was only visible really in India, Asia, and parts of the Middle East, and overlying parts around there as well. But we'll start off with that, and we'll look at some photos of it. This actually is from the space station, which is really cool. This is actually from an Indian newspaper. Again, India was one of the best places to be to see this, so you would have had to travel to get a good close look. We did share a link to see this happening live, so to speak, in the middle of the night in the United States, but it was through the internet, of course. That is actually the shadow of the moon, as seen from space, as the shadow travels across the surface of the planet. That's just a really, really cool picture to look at. Let's talk about the solar eclipse itself. This was not a total solar eclipse, but what's called an annular solar eclipse. A total solar eclipse covers up the entire sun. An annular solar eclipse leaves what people like to call a ring of fire. As you can see here, we had kids using darkened glass. I don't think that's probably the best way to do it. You really need to have these specific solar glasses or solar filters on telescopes to see it, but this is just such a phenomenal photo. That is the moon directly in front of the sun, but not fully covering it up, and so you get that little ring around it. It's just a really pretty photo. That one looks like it's coming from China, Liang, China. But yeah, solar eclipse is really, really cool to see. If you ever get a chance to see it, I mean, we did watch it online, so hopefully you got to see that. If not, we can try to get you a link to watch a replay of it. But if you've never seen one in real life, it's a phenomenal thing. Kind of surreal. Everything kind of goes quiet. Sometimes the animals don't know what to do because the sun gets dimmer, and sometimes it goes completely dark. If it's a total eclipse of the sun, it just goes straight to nighttime for a couple of seconds, and all the animals are like, huh, time to go back to sleep. But there's our Pac-Man sun. Just a really cool thing to see. Interesting orbital dynamics of our moon make it occasionally cover up our sun. Beautiful thing to see. All right, now on to the next things we want to talk about. Actually, the next couple things have to do with black holes. Now, really quickly talk about how stars evolve and die. Some stars, like our sun, they will eventually leave behind a nice big cloud of dust and gas and a little core, bright white hot core called a white dwarf. If it is a much larger, much more massive star, it leaves behind a much more chaotic wake. much more interesting to see as well. We call that a supernova, and you end up with what's called a neutron star in the middle. It's actually not a star, but the hot core, where all the atoms inside the core have had their protons and electrons, I should say, fused together, making neutrons, and so you have this really dense core. It's still super hot, but it's super, super dense. Those can also collapse even more, and that's what you get. That's where you get a black hole from, I should say. Well, this particular object that was discovered recently doesn't really fit into either of those categories. They're calling it a black neutron star, but it's like a combination of both, but neither at the same time. Kind of looking at this chart real quick, you'll see neutron stars. They have them kind of categorized, and then there's this weird gap, and this object happens to fit between this mass gap. It means that it's more massive than a neutron star, but not massive enough to be a black hole, and yet it acts kind of like both, but neither at the same, not exactly each at the same time. Very, very strange thing. We'll actually go to the next article because this is actually from the research location, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory. The men and women of this facility have been studying various parts of the sky, and they actually did discover this object. They're calling it an event. This is actually being called Event GW170817. Interesting name. It's a catalog, of course, and they actually did a Zoom call yesterday and have actually put up the detection paper. So if you want to read more about this, we'll leave it here. There's a lot going on. This, again, is a very strange object. They've got to do a little more research to figure out what this was. Was it a black hole? Is it a really, really small black hole? Some sort of new kind of black hole, maybe just barely forming? Is it a very, very massive neutron star, bigger than ever been seen before? Is it something kind of in between the both of them? If so, why? That's the good question that will hopefully be discovered as we do more research. Switching gears to a different kind of incident, this is actually a flash of light from what's being considered a merger of two black holes. Now, black holes are fairly small, and they kind of float around on their own. They usually either have an accretion disk around them, so dust and gas left over from when they exploded, and they eventually start trying to reconsume that. The other thing is that sometimes when black holes are formed, especially when they form from stars that have died, they start consuming things around them, because usually stars aren't by themselves. Our sun's kind of rare. The sun is just a star by itself. Some stars are in binary systems, so there's two stars going around each other, or trinary systems where there's two big stars and a smaller little star kind of going around them. And, well, this object may actually have been a merger of two black holes. This occurrence, I should say, would have been the merger of two black holes. This is not a picture, but an artist's rendition of a couple of black holes sitting inside of an accretion disk and bulldozing their way through all this accretion disk to eventually crash into each other and cause a flash of light. Again, one of these incidences that we're not really sure of, and more research will be done on it. Just wanted to leave that there, and actually the research paper is referenced, right there at the bottom of this, so you can read up more about it. Again, I'm not here to tell you everything about every article. I'm just here to tell you about the articles that exist, because maybe you've never seen this or didn't know it was out there, and let you do some research on it, and then we can talk about it on our Facebook page, or we can talk about it in the comment section. If the comment sections even work anymore is the question. Shifting gears to our next article, we're going to talk about New Horizons, which was sent out to go see the planet Pluto, which it did a few years back, and it's just still barreling its way through space. But it did something interesting. It's been taking pictures of the sky as it travels out, and it's seeing what's called parallax. Parallax is easily described by, well, just sit there, look at something. Put it fairly close, about maybe a foot from your face, and close your left eye. Stare at it with your right eye. Look at the background. And then close your right eye, open your left eye, look at the background, and you'll see the background shifts ever so slightly. That's kind of what's going on with stars. In this case, I believe they're looking at Proxima Centauri, which is the closest star to our sun. And from Earth and from New Horizons, you can actually see a slight difference in the location of Proxima Centauri, because New Horizons has gone out far enough to actually make parallax apparent. And that's just really cool to see. You can see it here in this picture. Again, it's the same star. It's sitting in one place, but it's being viewed at from two separate locations. One is here on the Earth, and then one is from New Horizons, which is, again, a probe floating through space, and it's far enough away now to actually see a difference. The background doesn't really shift because, again, it's all those background stars are really, really far away. When something's fairly close, it'll start to shift, and the closer you get, the more it starts to shift back and forth from the point of view of two different observers. Really, really cool to see. Hopefully New Horizons keeps functioning for a long time now that it's out deep, deep in space. All right, now on to our next thing. We're going to talk about Mars Perseverance rover. This one's kind of a negative thing going on, mostly because it's being delayed. The rover itself is done. Everything's loaded and ready to go, but there's a little bit of an issue, and so the launch of the rover has been delayed till the 22nd of July. They're worried about making sure that there's no contamination on the equipment that's being sent, because the last thing we want to do is send anything with germs or microbes or anything else from Earth to the planet Mars, which would contaminate everything. Of course, we've sent many rovers and landers already, but again, got to keep everything nice and clean. The biggest issue here is that there is a launch window. Now, NASA has until the 11th of August of this year, of 2020, to get this rover up into space and on its way to Mars. If it doesn't meet that window, we have to wait a few months. I think it's 18 months till the next window opens up again, just based on where we are and where Mars is in its orbit. And you know, you want to make sure you're using the most efficient way of getting there and the least amount of fuel to cut down on costs. And so you use the gravity of the planet to slingshot, and of course the orbit of each planet to slingshot orbiters or landers to the next destination. Interesting, but kind of sad. Hopefully they get everything ready to go and can get this thing off, or otherwise we've got to wait a few months. And sometimes delays are good because it lets things get ironed out. They can double check everything, but kind of an interesting thing. Got to wait a little bit longer for the next Mars rover. And finally, just going to talk real quick about Mary Jackson. Probably saw a movie about this a few years ago. Broke some color barriers and defeated some gender biases in early NASA engineering circles, and became a great engineer, a human computer in essence, during the early stages of NASA. Well, now NASA's headquarters named after her. I just thought it'd be kind of a cool thing to talk about real quick before we end this, because we're about 10-12 minutes into this. I think that's enough to talk about. So yeah, so all right, want to end with one last article, and this one's talking about Miss Mary Jackson, who is no longer with us on this plane of existence. She was considered a human calculator back before large-scale calculators were available for NASA. There's also a movie made about her called Hidden Figures a few years back. Well, there's a building now named after her. It's kind of an important building. It's the headquarters of NASA itself. So I'll leave this article there. Just kind of an interesting last little tidbit to talk about before we head off into the sunset, so to speak. So yeah, that's our segment for the week. We hope you are doing well wherever you are. Have a wonderful afternoon, evening, morning, or lunchtime, wherever you are. Please take care of yourselves. Stay safe out there. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Click on that subscribe button if you haven't already, and we'll be doing more of these. We'll be doing some sky updates, and we'll be doing some general astronomy stuff, how to find your way around the sky and how to find certain constellations, things like that. We'll be doing that all in the next few weeks. Please subscribe so you can get those when they come up. Ring the bell, of course, to be notified, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.